Welcome, everyone, to the Explainer. Let's jump right in, and I want you to start by doing something incredibly simple. Just imagine holding a piece of paper in your hand, a standard, everyday piece of paper. But not just any paper. We're talking about a piece of paper that literally dictates the flow of global finance. It costs practically nothing to produce, right? Just ink and cotton. Yet the entire world treats it as one of the most powerful things on Earth. International businesses absolutely depend on it. It's the lifeblood of the global oil trade. Central banks everywhere stockpile vast reserves of it. The whole shebang of global financial markets revolves around it. We are, of course, talking about the U.S. dollar. But that leads us directly to the central mystery we're unpacking today. How exactly did the dollar get this powerful? Was it always the world's dominant currency? Who even invented it? And what on earth were people using before it existed? Okay, let's dive into this and travel back hundreds of years to see exactly how this whole thing unfolded. Section 1. Before the dollar, European roots. So here is a wild fact right out of the gate. The story of the American dollar actually kicks off in Europe, hundreds of years before the United States was even a thought. Back in the 16th century, Europe was just packed with different currencies, but a major standout was a silver coin minted in Bohemia, which is part of the modern-day Czech Republic. It was called the U.S.Dollar. Over time, because people naturally love shortcuts, they chopped that long name down to just Thaler. And as that word bounced across borders and morphed through different accents and languages, Thaler eventually sounded a lot like dollar. So yeah, the word itself isn't even originally American. So what were early Americans actually using to buy things? Well, before the U.S. minted its own money, colonial America relied on a huge mashup of trusted international coins. People were spending British pounds and shillings, sure, but one coin in particular really stood out, the Spanish dollar, which you might know as the piece of eight. It was silver, super reliable, and accepted practically everywhere in international trade. And because the Spanish silver dollar was already so deeply trusted by the colonists, it heavily influenced the brand new American system that was just around the corner. Section 2. Birth of a currency, the 1792 standard. Picture this. It's post-1776. Independence is declared, and the struggling new nation realizes it desperately needs a unified, stable financial system. They had mounting war debts and paper money you could barely trust. That brings us to 1792, when the U.S. passes the Coinage Act. This is the moment the dollar was officially established as the basic monetary unit of the United States. No single genius invented it. Instead, the Coinage Act took centuries of financial history and standardized it for America. And remember, at this specific point in time, the value of this money was directly tethered to hard, physical, precious metals, like gold and silver. Now, why was this act such a game changer? Well, standardizing a national currency made accounting infinitely easier. It totally simplified trade between states that used to haggle over different exchange rates. It let the new government actually manage its bills and payments, but most importantly, it created a common economic language for everyone. Getting this foundation right was absolutely crucial for laying the groundwork for America to eventually explode into an industrial giant. Section 3. Path to Global Dominance, the Bretton Woods Era. Fast forward into the 20th century, and America's global footprint was expanding fast. Just look at the stark contrast after World War II. On one hand, you have Europe dealing with devastated economies and absolutely crippling debts. On the other hand, you have post-WWI America, emerging virtually untouched at home with enormous industrial muscle and financial power. It was crystal clear that the world urgently needed a brand new international financial system to rebuild from the rubble. The fix to this global crisis was hammered out in 1944 in a place called Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Representatives from dozens of countries got in a room and essentially agreed to three major steps. First, the U.S. dollar was officially pegged to gold at a fixed rate. Second, all the other major global currencies pegged their value to the U.S. dollar. And third, and this is the real kicker, the dollar officially became the undisputed centerpiece of international finance. Just like that, it was plugged directly into the heart of the global economy. Section 4. The Fiat Era, Untethering from Gold. So the system worked until it didn't. By the 1960s and early 70s, the Bretton Woods system was seriously starting to crack. Inflation was creeping up, and there were massive international demands on U.S. gold reserves. The pressure was just unsustainable. And then bam, we hit 1971. President Richard Nixon announces the famous Nixon Shock, permanently cutting the dollar's direct convertibility into gold. That physical tether that had anchored the currency for literally centuries officially severed. But hold on, that brings up a really fascinating, almost mind-bending question. If the dollar wasn't directly backed by shiny gold anymore, what on earth gave it its value? Why would anyone willingly trade their goods for a piece of paper if they couldn't eventually swap it for a precious metal? Well, welcome to the modern era of fiat currency. Today, the dollar's value is propped up by a wildly complex web of factors. It fundamentally relies on the world's absolute confidence in the U.S. government paying its debts. It leans heavily on the sheer output and strength of the American economy, the monetary policy and interest rates managed by central banks, and just raw global demand. Honestly, by 1971, the world had already built such a gargantuan financial system around the dollar that its value was sustained just by the sheer momentum of global trade and financial markets. Section 5. Anatomy of a Bill. Designing Security. Let's bring it back to the tangible reality sitting right there in your wallet. When you look at George Washington on a $1 bill, there is a lot more going on than just a history lesson. Modern currency is packed with specific seals, symbols, totally unique serial numbers, official signatures, and incredibly advanced security features. And these designs, which have been tweaked by artists, engravers, and government experts for decades, aren't just there to look pretty. They are absolutely crucial, highly evolved tools designed to prove the money is real and to stop counterfeiters in their tracks. Section 6. The future of money. Will the dollar remain king? Now, looking at our rapidly changing world, it's completely fair to ask if the dollar can actually hold onto its crown forever. The reality is, it is facing some serious emerging global competition. You've got China actively pushing for the yuan to take on a much bigger role in international finance. You have groups of countries trying to set up trade deals entirely outside of the dollar ecosystem. Central banks are diversifying their reserves, and of course, there's the tech revolution. The explosion of digital currencies, stablecoins, and the development of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. These are all very real forces challenging the traditional setup. But here's the other side of that coin. Replacing the dollar is incredibly difficult because its underlying strengths are just massive. The U.S. is still one of the absolute largest economies on the planet, with enormous, deep financial markets. The U.S. Treasury market is highly liquid. Basically, it's a giant, safe parking lot for the world's wealth. And maybe most importantly, there are already trillions of dollars deeply, fundamentally embedded into global trade, banking, and investment. That sheer structural weight means untangling the world from the dollar would be a monumental task. At the end of the day, no one has a crystal ball. It is impossible to predict future exchange rates or know exactly what the financial world will look like decades from now. But we can say this for sure. The dollar of the future is probably going to look very different from the dollar you know today. We're almost certainly looking at an evolution where physical cash takes a backseat and the dollar increasingly lives as a purely digital financial asset, wired directly into global tech. Man, what a journey this has been. Let's just quickly review this epic 500-year evolution. It all started as a 16th century silver thaler in Europe. Then it evolved into the 1792 American standard, physically tethered to precious metals. From there, it skyrocketed to become the post-World War II global centerpiece backed by a booming economy. And now, it's transforming right before our eyes into a modern digital asset. But if history teaches us anything, it's one undeniable lesson. No currency is guaranteed to stay on top forever. Empires, economies, and technologies all inevitably change. So what should you really take away from all this? Honestly, the next time you pull a dollar bill out of your pocket, don't just see a cheap piece of paper. You're holding centuries of history, a profound level of global trust, and incredible geopolitical influence. Because when you get right down to it, the story of the dollar isn't just the story of money, it is the story of power. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you all next time.